All right, imagine this. You're 65 and you go ahead and retire. And the very next day, the market crashes 20%. Episode 48 of T-minus Retirement, Brian and I are going to examine, is your retirement portfolio built for war and geopolitical uncertainty? All right, Brian.
Well, here we
episode
are.
Here.
Yes, but this is a hot topic. I'm glad we're discussing this.
Yeah, I think it's a timely topic because, of course, it's no surprise over the last. I guess we're going on a month and a half. The 2 week operation is now going on a month and a half, and I don't know about you, but I can't keep up if we're in peace talks or we're what stage of negotiations we're at. But
and who's involved?
Yeah, I mean, nonetheless, the market has rebounded quite a bit from just a few weeks ago. I think everybody can be happy about that. At some point here, the market gets it starts to move on from the latest headline. It gets a little tiresome, but really the reason for the video today is it brings up the question when we're in these events and the market's down 10% from its highs, it always brings up the conversation of, is my retirement plan still in place? Do I need to make any changes? Should I be making changes to my portfolio? And we've talked a lot about investment allocation and really how to handle geopolitical events in your investments. And I thought it'd be a good time to discuss your retirement plan because a lot of people have retirement plans. Of course, we've put retirement plans for many clients, and it's always good to come back to these during times of uncertainty. And really the thing that I wanted to demonstrate here is how advisors, how we model in things that are completely out of our control, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just the market declining is of course out of our control, but more importantly, the headlines are out of our control. War is certainly out of our control. And we're trying to put plans together that are going to navigate all these different scenarios that are really out of our control. So,
real quick before you go on with that, we all remember a few weeks back, we released an episode of T-minus Retirement that asked the question in its title, should the events of war, should war change, the investor's diversified portfolio, especially in terms of retirement planning. And this is kind of like, here we are, it's Tuesday, the 14th of April, one day before tax day. And like you just pointed out, here, it looks like the market's definitely showing some resiliency in its bounce back this week. And there were a few weeks back, some people were very concerned, very worried, what's happening, almost as if it was, an even larger systemic problem. And so just kind of to shape some context into our conversation, here we are mid-April, and let's consider what should we be looking at? What should we be doing?
No, that's good insight. Because we're in a lot different situation than we were a month ago. But regardless of that, when we build portfolios, there are ways to stress test a portfolio to model these types of events happening. And, in the intro there, it was kind of bombastic in saying the market crashes, 20% the day after you retire. And again, that's just something that is a possibility. Is it likely? Probably not, but we can actually look and see what does that look like. I'm going to chart on here, Brian,
Sure.
And I don't want to go into all the details of this financial plan, but this is our good client, Tom and Tammy Temecula. I'll give you just a high level view. A net worth of about $2.75 million. They have some assets in their bank account. They have some 401ks, IRAs, brokerage accounts. They have a very typical Temecula house, about $900,000, and they have a mortgage. They're, towards the end of their mortgage. They got less than $200,000 that they owe, but they're just at retirement. I believe they're 61. So in their case, they want to retire at 65, and what happens if the markets decline by some degree at retirement? That's the whole point of coming up with retirement plans, because there are ways to model this taking place. Many people are familiar with the Monte Carlo analysis. I mean, without going into all the probably boring details there's a variety of outcomes that can take place. And really what we're doing when we're doing financial planning is we're trying to account for everything that we know. We're trying to account for the things that we can control, like how much your savings, what are you spending, some tax strategy, where are you saving your money in different type of tax advantage accounts. But of course, there's things that are completely out of everybody's control, and we have to be able to say, here's a kind of a range of the possible outcomes. That's kind of what you see on this screen right here, probably the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and then we get a median. But over the last month, conversations come up, especially when the market's down off its highs, and we can kind of come back to these plans and say, okay, first of all, your retirement is still on track. We've planned for events like this, but let's really look in Tom and Tammy's case, because, let's say Tom and Tammy were very concerned that the market was going to decline drastically, at their retirement. Their retirement's in a couple years, so nobody knows exactly what's going to take place, but there are ways to stress test that. Yeah. And again, their probability of succeeding in their financial plan and living a full life and traveling and paying for kids' colleges and all the rest is right at 95%. So, baseline, they're in extremely good shape to retire at 65. They're on track. But like I said, what if the market drops 20% the day after they retire? Okay, the market, their probability goes down from 95 down to 89.
Yeah.
Now, is that worst case scenario? No. Is it something that could happen? Absolutely. But I would also say it's not, even if it drops to 89%, it's not going to really have us have to reconfigure their entire retirement plan. Now, some people like to look at worst case scenarios, and we can also play that through. What if the market drops by 40% the day after they retire? It'll recalculate here. Okay, their retirement plan goes to 79%. Now, this really starts that conversation of saying, hey, okay, what is likely, what is within the realm of possibilities, and if it's somebody that really likes to account for as many contingencies as they can, maybe there's some things that we could do to help them get through those times if the market was to drop by 20, 30, God forbid, 40% the day after you retire. Maybe it's, hey, we need to adjust the budget. Maybe it is we keep a little bit of extra cash off to the side, so that way we're not having to pull from investments during that time. If you remember Tom and Tammy, they have about $100,000 in bank account assets. Maybe it's we bolster those up before retirement to get them through any unknown period. Now, we have to just understand that money is going to be relatively dead money. We're going to make just a few percent on that. But if that helps their comfort level, given the situation and the possible outcomes, maybe that's right for them. Mm-hmm. All that is to say, there's a lot of things that are out of your control. I know I mentioned that in retirement, and you have to be willing to adjust with whatever's going on in the world. Maybe we need to adjust the budget if there's a major market decline. Maybe, we need to save a little bit more. We need to potentially work a little bit longer, pick up some part-time work or something like that. But you just have to go into retirement knowing that, hey, not every outcome is the perfect outcome, but the vast majority of times we're planning for a lot of scenarios to where we can get through quite a bit of uncertainty. And just even if there is like a war or the market declines in a normal fashion, we have built retirement plans for that, and we built portfolios for that. You just kind of have to get through those times the best that you can.
Yeah, and Dustin, you mentioned, and I know you've been talking about it in this demonstration here, but you talk about contingencies, and like you said, adjusting the budget that can be necessary when it comes to data spending. Oftentimes, you also mentioned it too. It's saving a little bit more during those working years, whether you're still working full time in your career or you've maybe taken on maybe a less demanding job that's part time, or whatever the opportunity is, but at the same time, how do we get to these conclusions where it's like, hey, maybe you're in the 95% probability of success? Well, we've taken into consideration, what you need for your income, and what kind of additional goals or special opportunities, activities you want to do. Maybe it's the vacationing in retirement. Maybe it's the paying for the grandkids' college, or a wedding or whatever it is. And it's very helpful when you're working through your planning. It's very helpful to think through and list out all those potentials, so that way a thorough plan can include that. And so when you take the time as to show someone, hey, this is what your success factor looks like in spite of market downturns. It's important to remember everything is cyclical. Market activity is cyclical. So just because we have a downturn, it doesn't mean it stays in that downturn indefinitely. We know it doesn't. It comes back up. But being able to have the kind of budget and investments that can weather through all that. That's really what we're wanting to consider before anyone makes that magic leap into retirement. And so taking those considerations, those goals, those wishes, kind of all those details into the plan, that's really important in helping narrow in that percentile or that factor of success.
No, that's 100% right, Brian. And if you're watching this video and you're finding yourself saying, hey, I don't have any of this set up and I'm a couple years out from retirement, that's where you need to reach out to us. And, we can help you build a plan like this to use as a roadmap to that retirement. Maybe we need to make some changes or some adjustments before you get to that eventual point of making the leap and retiring. We want to have as many of the contingencies covered as we can, and then really working with a professional by your side to help navigate those times. Because one thing I can promise you is in your 30 years of retirement, I hope it's a long, good retirement. Yeah. We'll have bear markets, we'll have war, we'll have uncertain times, and it's having people in your corner to help make sure that you stay on track. It's not about predicting the future. It's not about just beating the NASDAQ every year. It's really about having things properly set up that's going to work for you and for your life and your retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
going to chart off here, Brian.
Sure. Absolutely. It does. It takes that intentional planning. And, like you said, Dustin, if somebody doesn't have a professional and they want to engage one, obviously, like you said, we're available. You can look in the show notes and the bio info how to get in touch with us. But if you do have a financial planning professional that you're working with, make sure that you're getting a thorough plan put together and that it's comprehensive and taking all these things into consideration. Because geopolitical events like what's happening in the Middle East, the reality is these are not just going to cease. We're not in a state of perfect peace on this planet, and we're probably not going to be for a long time. But at the same time, with that uncertainty also means that there's the cycles we talk about in investment performance. And so, weathering through all of that, like you said, it takes that accountability and that partnership that, you work through it and you look at every detail and you figure out, hey, how do we make sure that we're going to be fine entering that next stage of life, that whatever it is that we're preparing for.
Yeah, well, and before we go, Brian, I had one other thing I wanted to share. So I'm going to share my screen one more time.
Sure.
Because, sometimes things seem overly simplistic. Let's say you have a retirement portfolio that is annualizing 6%, and you say, hey, well, I'll take less than that. I'll take 4% per year, and I'll just be fine. I wish it was that simple, but sequence of return starts to come in. And the reason I bring this up is because over time, you need to be returning back to these plans to make sure that you are staying on track and that there's no additional adjustment that is needed. This is a quick one-pager put out by Prudential, and it's the same portfolio. it has the same average annual return. It's a $1.5 million portfolio, withdrawing 4% per year, adjusted for inflation. But the difference is the first 3 years of this portfolio on the left see negative returns, okay? And the one on the right sees positive returns during the first 3 years. You never know which scenario you're going to retire into. And you honestly need to be ready for both. But the outcomes of these two scenarios are completely different. The one on the left, negative returns early on, sees the portfolio run out of money after 20 years. Again, it's the same withdrawal rate. It's the same average annual return. And yet the portfolio on the right, because of those early year positive returns, it more than doubles after 30 years, because you've had all these years of really not eating into any of the principal value because the market did so well.
Yeah.
I bring this up because you need to be working with somebody that can keep you on track. And if you're in the unfortunate scenario where you retire and you have 3 years of a bear market, and it's happened before, that somebody can work with you to make the adjustments that may be needed, because it goes back to some of the things we talked about. Maybe we need to make some adjustments. Maybe we need to not withdraw the 4% out of these accounts during that time. If you have savings outside, that'd be a good time to take, bank account assets and then allow these invested assets to recover a little bit. Maybe, you need to kind of think of some alternative options, because if this scenario happens, that's going to relate to your financial plan, and hopefully you can catch it early, where if you're just kind of doing this using back of the napkin math, you might think you're okay. And then 20 years go by and, you have $84,000 left and you're spending that a year.
Well, and that's a good point, Dustin, because it's not, it's not just basic arithmetic, where it's like, if I make 6, I take 4, and I can just repeat that cycle, because you introduce there, when you look at a sequence of returns chart, or table like that, you're actually, there's more factors, there's more variables at play. And so that's where, it's not just back of the napkin math, it's a little more complicated than that. But hopefully you're aiming for higher returns than just say 6%. But, that's a very individual type of approach.
Yeah. And it's going to be, the returns are going to be sporadic and scattered, and again, that goes back to incorporating the portfolio that you're invested into your financial plan, so you can try to model as best you can the returns that, more accurately that you're receiving, to give you a good idea of how your plan is changing with the times.
Yes. Well, this has been very, very helpful, Dustin. I appreciate you taking the time to show us this, and especially that table at the end, dealing with returns. I would say, like, for those who are saving and investing, don't let the war that's going on scare you. It's important to, like, kind of what the chart showed you. It's important to be invested, and the longer that you are, the more rewarding it is. So it's not like you just all of a sudden take your cash and throw it in the market at retirement and say, okay, off I go. At that point, it's important to be building up even before that, and having those years of compounding growth do their work for your money. So,
and you have to remember too, Brian, even if you retire tomorrow, you don't take your 1.5 million that you've been saving for the last 30, 40 years and convert it to cash and just live off the cash. That you'll certainly run out of money, relatively quickly too. So it's important to have a plan and work with somebody that can help you navigate whatever the waters look like over your retirement years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dustin, thank you for taking the time to share this with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Folks, for those of you who are watching or listening, if this was, I know it was short, but if it was helpful, remember to like and subscribe the video and the channel. And other than that, T-minus retirement episode 48. We're excited because we're 2 away from episode 50. Stay tuned for more, and we'll make sure that we continue to bring these relevant matters as things are happening out there, and keep you updated and informed.
We'll see you in the next one.
Yes.